the working groups and contributed to the discussion about various resources or various, norms or, uh, you know, like like I don't know even know what kind of resource is an identity. Like, is it a? It's a very, but it sounds kind of like an important resource. So I guess what we're going to do is we're going to hear from someone from each group who took notes and is like the scribe and is happy to like represent and summarize the kind of key things that the group paid attention to, key things that came up, something that like everyone should look at, and then I'm going to facilitate a conversation between anyone who wants to talk about it, to like see what the various issues are, what like feedback everyone has, right? Because having split up into various tracks, we didn't all get to participate in all of the topics, but I'm sure many of us have opinions. But we're hopefully going to be more productive because we had groups work independently for a little bit of time. So can I get the scribes up here? Whoever, is representing the different groups. We got Ian. Ian, are you coming up here? Amazing. We got to get some chairs, I guess. Yeah. Here, let's back up a little bit. Ian. Let's get up and back up a little bit. I think we're got our backs to some peeps over here. We're missing one group, right? Where's the scribe from the crisis group? Nathan went that way. Okay, we're going to look for Nathan. It's a crisis, and how are we going to manage it? I guess we had some emergent authority being delegated to Sarah, and she's going to go get Nathan. Hopefully she keeps us up to date on the state of the crisis so that we're not left here not knowing what's going on. But I'm just kidding. That's just something that is something that came up during the crisis discussion, though. Anyway, so I guess... Yeah. He's on the way. Great. Sweet. So I guess I'm going to pass the mic, and we're going to hear about the kind of key ideas and concepts that came up from the groups before having a broad discussion for maybe an hour about the various topics. It should be fun. Here, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Derek. I didn't know I was going to be the scribe until recently, but we were discussing purpose. What is the purpose of RChain? Kind of a fundamental question, I guess you could say. And then we spent a little time, what is the purpose of the platform and what is the purpose of the co-op? We spent a lot of time talking about what is the platform. One of the things we talked about was to create a digital computer platform that is a global scaled network that is economically secure, censorship resistant, reliable, available to everyone, decentralized, fair, transparent, sustainable, enabling collaboration. We talked about the difficulty about actually coming up with a purpose for the platform before the platform is actually launched, and I made this point. It's hard to know how the tool will be used until people are actually using it. Then what is the purpose of the co-op? Conceivably, if RChain is successful, the co-op could have billions of dollars in resources at its disposal, so what should be its purpose? And we talked about stewarding the development of the platform, cooperative at scale, and the idea of trying to create a world for everyone that we want to live in. And we were kicking around different ideas of, buying rainforests out in Costa Rica. Is that kind of is that something that would fall inside the co-op's purpose or not? Are we just trying to foster the development of the platform, or do we have greater goals, a greater purpose? And one of the things we were talking about was creating a Bill of Rights, ownership of identity, protocols on autonomy, and just, we were talking about a point Greg made about the problems that has been with Ethereum and how they made the decision to fork the network and to roll back with the DAO, and addressing those kind of questions. So we're interested in creating a Bill of Rights for users, and the desired impacts of restoring autonomy to the people, and to elevate and maintain trust.
Okay, I'm Ian Bloom. I'm one of the directors, and the subject we were talking about was communications. And just to kind of poll everyone in the room, has anyone here seen any problems with co-op communications? Or no, I mean, right. So can we name all the communication channels that we have out there? I mean, there's Mattermost, there's Telegram, there's Discord, there's Slack. There's GitHub, keep going. Reddit. Huh? Twitter. Right, there's a newsletter. There's YouTube. There's the website. Medium. Facebook. So how many channels is that altogether now? Right. So, and which of those channels are the official voice of the co-op? Which ones can you trust as being authoritative? Right. We all have our voice. So what Navneet just said, that basically Navneet was saying that everyone has their individual voices, and as a co-op, I don't think we want to censor or tell people that they can't open a channel of communications and give their views and their opinions on the project. But it does get pretty difficult for especially new people looking in on the project and new members trying to figure out what is going on. So our discussion group, we came together and we decided that the co-op should hire a full-time communications director. And this position would answer to the chief operating officer and would have the authority to manage the administrators of all these different channels, if they're official channels, to go to these channels and ask the administrators of those channels what issues are coming up, what topics are getting the most likes, and then to curate, to lift out this content and to elevate it, to promote it to more sticky channels that are like an official announcement channel for the co-op, either weekly or perhaps even daily, to blog posts, or just so that we're not losing all of the good content that's coming up in these channels and often just scrolling off of the page. And this position also, okay. And so to find this individual who would have this role, we were thinking to utilize our newly created nominating committee to vet candidates and go over resumes, figure out who would be best to do this. And this position also would carry some authority to dictate how we communicate these messages out to the various stakeholders, whether that be through making changes to websites, or I mean, this is going to be someone who'd be able to make pretty high-level decisions, including probably hiring or managing staff. So that's our description of the communication problem and what we want to do about it. This was our decision as the little breakout group we just had. So, all right.
Quick questions. Did you guys talk about like kind of moderation policies or anything like that?
And so, for a channel to have the moniker of being an official RChain channel and be listed on the RChain's website or FAQs, it should follow some code of conduct. And right now, we haven't come up with too many rules in that direction, but there's definitely one that we've asked for, and that none of these channels should have a lot of conversation about speculation on the value of the tokens or the future value of the tokens. So if we have a channel where that activity isn't being tamped down, then we would basically delist or dissociate the co-op from that channel. We wouldn't list it as official on our website or FAQ. All right. I was going to say that the channel admins would probably have a dual role of both moderation and curation. So, you ready, Nathan? Yeah. Keep talking.
Is there any moderation that goes on now? I mean, I think I've seen some amount of moderation, but I also don't really follow the channels much. Is there moderation policies? You want let's hear.
There is a table with at least a dozen channels with names by them and with a etiquette and guidelines page and stuff like that. So I've asked those folks to sort of tell us what's going on, and a couple of them have started. So at least that much is happening.
That's cool. And is that publicly available? Can we find the mods list? Is it like real names and everything? Okay. It's on GitHub. Sweet. So you can contact the mods if you're upset. If someone's engaging any kind of abusive online behavior, you'll know who to call. Okay, I guess we're good to go on the crisis management group. Just keep trying, I think. Just keep trying until they turn it on. No? Okay, well, here we go.
Thanks. Hey guys, I'm Nathan from New York City. I just want to acknowledge you all for trekking to this conference. So I acknowledge your presence and your insights. And our group is focusing on, we focused on some sort of we the people kind of talk. I think my challenge as the scribe will be to make this as a rap. If I can rap about this, then I really understand it. So maybe by the end of a couple of days, I'll be able to rap for you about this. Sort of like a Hamilton type thing. Okay, so here we basically mapped out some of the attack vectors. Man, I'm like right in the middle of this thing. Okay, so we have inside attacks, outside attacks, governance, and technical, legal, communication attacks, ethical, technical, and morale of membership. This is going to go pretty fast, sorry to say. So we first defined a crisis. So this is the sort of what. So we think that it's a bunch of these things, so I'm going to go through a bunch of these things. So it's something that we already don't have a process to deal with, which is instead of just saying, oh, this is like our typical mode of communication, this is something that we don't have a process to deal with. So it's an unpredictable event or a situation with no framework, which kind of requires a response with a specific time frame. And specific in the time frame, Vlad, well, what I should say is a member communicated that in terms of time frames, what's actually useful is to set the time frame and then to actually respond as late as we can, so that would allow us to adopt a mode of communication that could inform the most amount of people with the most amount of information. So instead of normal processes, right, the nature of communication changes. The people who are most connected in the network, this is, here we get into what, and you can stop me if this is too in-depth. Here we get into describing what actually happens in the crisis, which is that usually the people who are most connected in the network are the ones who end up doing most of the work. And so that's sort of a necessary centralization because it comes from the nodes who have the most information about who is capable dealing with the crisis and who have ideas about what's going on. So in this case, that would be like we just sort of say Greg, Nash, and Mike. So here we create a timeline for that enables the crisis management team the longest possible timeline. Here we have to create a framework, so which is sort of like basically a series of questions. I'm going to come back to voting mechanisms in a bit. So these are questions that have to be answered by a certain body of people, which I assume is going to be both an executive board and then like a vote of the co-op. But this is just a series of questions. So who is the incident, so it's like who, what, where, when, why kind of thing. So who is the incident response team responsible for these decisions, which has to do specifically with the vertical that we're in. So if it's a legal question, then it goes to the legal team. Obviously, if it's a marketing, then it goes to marketing team. Or if it's a tech, then it goes to tech, but there's also some sort of Venn diagram which kind of overlaps everything, which will probably be the sort of representative democracy. And that gets also into why people are voting the way they do in those Venn diagrams, which we haven't quite figured out yet, and that has to do with an inside-outside vector. So then we talk about when the crisis happens, so like these people who are responding to these things, like how long is their tenure going to be? How are they elected? How are they informed? How informed are these votes? This has to do with the belief that you need a particular amount of information about the subject in order to make an informed decision, and yet not discluding a co-op vote. But this will probably turn to the co-op bylaws. Where does the authority? This is sort of the authority membership. KYC, EML sort of validators to actually validate your authority on that particular matter. And then a sort of question of like actually how feasible is the proposed solution. This has to do with staking of proof of authority. So how are crises documented, which goes to what Ian was talking about like how we kind of communicate, like what is our actual communication method? And then so for the crisis documentation team, like Facebook has Pager, and so like there are guys who are on like the tombstone shift overnight who are responsible for staying up 24 hours a day for that particular allotted time. It's like you're working in a hospital or something, and then you have a particular set of credentials that allow you to do that, and a particular set of tallied chores. So, are you guys getting all this? Is this cool? Because how am I on time?
Yeah, I mean, just just keep going.
Okay.
And then.
Okay,
and then
so
we'll,
then this gets back to so we assume that there's a series of questions, right? And so they're here for you to read. I'm going to continue going on. Another question is how transparent should we be with particular crises? This is particularly relevant to any particular a DAO hack or parity bug that you particularly care to list out. Okay, so and then I will actually say that Vlad has been really great about sharing with us the first principle solution that he feels has been very useful for him in his experience. So which kind of goes back to our purpose here. So we can just basically take this as a composition and just sort of compositionally just drop this into our code base for first principles. So obviously there's a legal framework for the jurisdiction that RChain is operating in at that time, which will be like obviously the main thing. But then there's like also types of principles such as like how, like, you know, which goes into our purpose, like, you know, a fair and free, democratic, you know, situation. And then we have to also establish a definitive document of security procedures, not only for our internal crisis team, but for our members. Like, let's assume that everyone is operating on X phone or X type of email servers, or specifically, there has to be a definitive document for our community that says these are the things that we recommend that you do if you're part of the blockchain community, or if you use a MacBook, or if you use X or whatever. So we have to come up with a definitive document. This is also important for, say, like an event like this, when we're publicly stating on the internet, oh, all of our RChain team is going to be here at this one point. It's sort of an attack vector. So there's sort of physical security, social engineering, incident response, networking and infrastructure. And then anyone who escalates a crisis, this sort of goes into...
Are you saying that like we should have like pre-prepared case studies, or like pre-prepared idea of what to do in the case that we have these types of crises?
That's a really great question. I feel like you're lobbing me a question.
No, I'm just trying to like I think that was the point of like all the different cases. There is we should have like a document with like maybe what it might look like if this were to happen, you know, to the best of our speculation.
Yeah, so it's like a fire drill.
It's like a what? Like a fire drill. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
So you kind of know what a fire looks like, and so you plan for the exits.
Like when our Discord server goes down, this is what our treatment looks like.
So like that, I think that was one of the main takeaways from the group was like, in terms of to-dos, or like a recommendation is like, oh, let's think of crises that we could imagine, and what it might look like for people to respond.
Right, like if funds are locked or that kind of thing. So, and then this last point here, which I'll make, is that anyone who escalates a crisis, so like the escalation process, should actually, the person who's escalating should have skin in the game and reduce legal liability. So that we have to encourage accountability and minimize sort of liability of that person. So rather than just people throwing stones at the Google bus, people can actually kind of be part of the solution. So yeah, what we're going to do is we'll put this in a definitive document, and we'll get sort of started on the process. So thanks, guys. That's it.
Don't worry, Navneet. We're gonna open it up and have like a proper conversation with everyone, or everyone who really wants to speak up. About I think what we'll do is we'll go through each of the group's topics a little bit and see what's like really important for us to talk about for each of them. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. But stay here because we're gonna go. So for the purpose one, we like there were you covered a bunch of different topics. So like first, like there's like all these principles, right? So we want a global scaled network, economically secure, censorship resistant, reliable, available to everyone, decentralized, fair, transparent, sustainable, enabling collaboration. So those are all they sound more or less agreeable, but like let's see if does anyone have any objections to any of these principles? I mean, we might, right? Just curious. Yeah, fairness is definitely not easy to define. Yeah, you want to go run around?
There's also a typo. It's not economically secure, it's economically secured.
Secured.
With a
That
D.
makes sense with a D.
It's very different.
Yeah. So some of these.
Is that like economically leaderless?
Yeah. So basically, it seems like our purpose is to provide a platform that's like a public blockchain, right? And ultimately, we want to create support a world that we all want to live in. But what is that? What kind of a world do we want to live in? Greg was pretty clear that he wants to solve climate change. And I think probably most people will think that's a good goal, but I don't know if everyone in the RChain community will want to use RChain to solve climate change. What do you guys think? You agree, or you think that everyone are we all united with? Like, is somehow the world we want to live in? Are we going to be more specific? Like, I think that maybe we could be. Sustainable is in here, and like I'm not really sure if that's a principle. Yeah. Democratic. What's with democratic? Is it a principle? Yeah, that's right. So somehow, like, it's kind of weird to have vague principles, but it also feels good, like fair, transparent, decentralized, reliable. I mean, who doesn't want that? But like, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to like decide what we want in terms of our purpose. But in terms of what we see is the best for the world. Right? Like, I don't think we're going to be united by our worldviews that necessarily that much. I think if anything, we're going to be united by like our use of the RChain kind of RChain software stack.
I'll just put help each other. I mean, I think that's whatever you guys came to with that end. We want to live in a better world, and to me, at the end of blockchain or any whether it's B2B or person to person or whatever, it's you want to get goods. People have needs, people have goods, and you want that exchange, and it makes the world better.
So people like are going to use the blockchain because it's useful, and they're naturally going to come to the RChain community. And normally, what happens is, if you don't set anything that's in the culture, people will basically just bring their own culture to the situation, right? But everyone who sets an example also will kind of naturally encourage people to replicate that kind of behavior. So maybe we do want to have principles beyond just like use the blockchain and enjoy.
So coordination at scale is a pretty key piece that's differentiates RChain in a way, and it's a key piece to getting to a world that we can live in, for one thing, and would want to live in. So it was the observation that the current ways of coordinating are just not cutting it with the problems that are on the horizon, so we need a different way.
Yeah, great, yeah. So, I mean, I definitely resonate with that. Do you want to pass the mic behind you? There's a mic. There's another mic.
What is coordination at scale?
So cool, yeah, coordination at scale. So basically, is that a question for you?
That was a question to me. I
okay.
think.
Yeah, great. Totally. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll take.
All right, I can give a shot at that. So coordination at scale, to do what also is an important thing. One issue that was mentioned was climate change, but I would propose that instead of thinking about a specific issue, there we go, that's better. Instead of thinking about a specific issue, we should think about what kind of problem that is. So that is, at what scale is that kind of problem? There are lots of different problems or potential problems at that kind of scale. Some with different worldviews may think they are problems and some might not. But if there are enough people who can coordinate on a large enough scale to address whatever existential problems they see coming over their horizon, that's what we need in order to continue as a society, right? Because if we are not able, at our current in my opinion, our current infrastructure and our current ways of governing, they're just not equipped to deal with these types of problems. You know, existing nation states were set up with borders for a reason because the problems were largely confined to those things. They were confined to those borders. Now we are demonstrably not in that state of affairs anymore. There are things, I think almost everybody could agree that there are things that could potentially wipe us out, all of us. And if we don't have a way to coordinate, that's our fate.
Hear, hear. Go Kenny. Yeah, actually, I think that really resonates with me. I mean, to me, like the whole point of blockchain is that it's like a new kind of like international institution that isn't based in the legal tradition, but which allows us to coordinate in ways that, you know, before we only really knew how to do inside of the tradition of like this social contract of agreeing not to interfere with enforcement mechanisms. So, you know, I mean, you know, thinking of the blockchain as a way for us to coordinate, I think is not a stretch at all. Do you want to pass the mic to the back? This guy with the hat has been waiting for longer.
I just have a question.
Thank you.
Which is,
please speak into the microphone.
yeah. So I'm not being facetious, but is something like global warming, is that RChain or is that a DAP? Mm-hmm. Is that an issue over?
Yeah, is global warming RChain or a DAP? It's a DAP, definitely. But it definitely like helped as an example to get us to this point where we're talking about the idea that we can use this to form the basis of coordination in maybe new types of organizations and new types of structures, and to, like, you know, you can experiment with the organizational design in a smart contract, really kind of iterate in a very quick way. And, you know, it's yet to be seen exactly what we can accomplish experimenting with governance on the blockchain. But I think that might be something that everyone has in common in terms of, like, what the blockchain is for. Like, to form the basis of, like, experimenting with new organizational structures and new kind of international institutions. Because, you know, the blockchain is a very international thing, right? And that was totally represented by the working group also. All right, Ian, let's hear it.
Well, before we move on, can we unpack coordination? Can we break that down a little bit more?
Yeah, that sounds great. Coordination is kind of when you want to make a decision as a function of the decisions that other people need to make, and so that other people are making. And it normally involves some amount of communication or synchronization or prior knowledge about how everyone will behave. And institutions and governance processes really are all examples of things that we use to coordinate. In kind of there's a people study coordination from a bunch of different perspectives, game theory, anthropology, like sociology. It's kind of a, you know, we can't like explain it all at once, but you know, you got a feeling.
So yeah, kind of bringing it home. I mean, so the co-op, we definitely have some big decisions on the horizon. So part of this coordination is we have to decide, you know, what the big decisions are that we have to make, and then figure out the means to decide them.
Yeah. So you know, if you want to make a decision in a way that, like, people will appreciate, and if you can make it unilaterally, like, but actually coordinating with everyone can be really helpful, right? And, like, could lend a lot of legitimacy, right? If we have to make decisions and other people, and if in a way, and you can choose to do it in a way that's coordinating or not, then it's good to coordinate. But you know, somehow there's, like, the blockchain used as a coordination tool, and then there's, like, our own coordination problems. Like, we're probably gonna have to address our problems before we can use the blockchain to address them. But definitely, like, I think the blockchain is kind of coordination technology.
Agreed.
Oh, go.
One thing has been occurring to me, I'm at the lower level of the technical aspect of all this, and I assume that there are technical things that will get solved by everyone here, and I don't have to worry about them.
Mike.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not worried about the technical stuff, but I'm very attracted to the co-op aspect and the democratic aspect. And the problem when you have a decentralized organization is that you don't have the Pope at the top, you don't have the preacher at the top, you don't have the president necessarily. So, and it's a great idea to try to make decisions that way, yet then those decisions have to be made about ideas. So what's at the top and everything is subsumed under that is ideas. And the ideas we're talking about here are pretty undefined. Fairness, you know, that's up for grabs. So I think it's a good idea to take something. I mean, the global warming one strikes me as a good one, since we can't live anywhere if we don't have somewhere to live, you know. So that strikes me as a good one. However, any kind of magnetization around an idea can lose its steam over time, so it always has to be revitalized. I've been around churches a lot, and they're always using the word community till you don't want to hear it anymore. So I think the idea, there should be some idea at the top that everyone has in their mind that they may have different definitions, but you can get specific about one idea.
Oh yeah, that gave me a cool idea. Maybe we should all share at some, like, you know, right after Greg's comments, what we want to do with RChain as like at least like if it's, you know, I'm sure some of us have very particular things we want to do with RChain, and well, we're gonna save the environment. Let's hear it. Let's hear from Greg.
Well, no, I just wanted to point out that in the discussion with respect to rights, or the Bill of Rights, and I kept longing for a relationship to purpose, but I think one of the things that Evan was pointing out is that the Bill of Rights should somehow set up limits, obligations, and authority with respect to coordination, right? So, you know, we probably don't want the co-op to enable or authorize a lynch mob, right? Which is quite possible that it could happen. So I think there's something there about the limitations of coordination that the co-op needs to consider.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I found a couple of times today that, like, the distinction between, like, the RChain community and the RChain co-op is something that, like, we need to kind of remember that it does exist, right? There is an RChain community outside of the RChain co-op, and there's got to be checks and balances. It can't really be that the co-op determines the future of the whole ecosystem. Especially because of the international nature of the purpose, and the U.S. nature of the co-op. But yeah, let's share some more things that we want to do with the blockchain. I think the you know, we got someone who's eager over here.
What?
Sorry, you want to share?
Just another way to frame the climate change thing is to do it sort of inverse. The opposite is, we want to build a regenerative civilization. So we have the opposite of that now. We have one that's not regenerating itself, it's destroying the biosphere. So you could reframe it as, we want to build tools to facilitate a regenerative culture and civilization.
Yeah. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
So, I guess, you know.
Yeah, I would love to add something. I mean, one of the most striking ideas for using RChain for me personally is to build the Earth issue tracker. So to build a tracker where we can put in issues we see, analyze them as a community, and then in the second stage come up with solutions. You know, how we can approach those problems. And in the third stage, to come up with constructs, how we actually can gather the resources and build the bodies we need, like legal identities and so on, to execute on these issues. Something like that. You know, I think this strikes me, and it is inclusive to problems like climate change.
Yeah.
Are we still going on what we're going to build?
Yeah, I think we should take a little bit of time to relate like the Bill of Rights idea, because the main takeaway here somehow is like, oh, we should have some kind of document that describes what we want and maybe relates like basic governance principles to making sure that like the way that we govern things guarantees that what we want is possible. Like if we want to make sure that it's like censorship resistant and that we have this like very public nature. For example, we might want checks and balances between like the co-op and the platform, and maybe what we should think about is like in the future, working towards like documenting the types of things that would guarantee that we get a platform that we could use for the types of like these types of applications. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to take it away from what you just said, but to Greg's point about like setting limitations, and then also to Peter's point about like kind of reverse engineering, it might be fruitful to think about the things that you oppose personally that would make you leave the co-op, and then kind of reverse engineer that. Like, so why would we fork? Why would you renounce your membership and certain things like that, and then we kind of reverse engineer.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So why would you leave the co-op? Would you leave the co-op if there's a hard fork that stops an application for like in any case, only if it's for political reasons? What if it's something that only some people disagree with, right? We have a couple of precedents, right? We have the DAO hard fork is probably the main one, right? That would be the kind of thing that like ends up testing the extent to which we want the blockchain to be immutable, censorship resistant, and the extent to which we care about preventing harms due to bugs, right, or due to kind of consequences of the applications that use the blockchain. And like that's kind of like a kind of a pretty big question. Does it even have strong feelings? We probably have like people all over the spectrum in terms of anti hard fork, pro hard fork.
Yes, I have strong feelings. So from my perspective, lived through this kind of thing in a different community, I didn't choose one way or another. I chose to try to do something productive. If that makes sense? So yeah, there are going to be maybe disagreements, but in my head, I don't think about what I would choose or why I would leave. I want to think about what I can do to make something better. So if we all have the same sort of mindset from the beginning, there still could be disagreements and such like that, but if there's a way to merge, if that's the right word.
Reconcile?
Yeah.
Reconcile is a good one. So there's basically, there's somehow like the main purpose of RChain is something that all of our governance processes should reflect, right? We should never have a decision made in our governance processes that runs contrary to the purpose of the community on some kind of basic level. But what you can find is that like sometimes there are cases that come up where there was no prior agreement or idea that like we would do one thing or the other, and to the extent to which we can predict that this is going to happen, we should probably talk about it. So one of the things that came up in the crisis group was, what if, someone did something on the blockchain which made it illegal to run a node in a particular jurisdiction. GDPR is becoming active in Europe pretty soon, which could make it illegal for anyone to store people's private information in certain circumstances. And it might be that like blockchain information applies. There are like certain challenges that we can kind of see down the road, and the more that we can talk about those and preempt those, the more we're going to be able to deal with, for example, like the crisis that might emerge from having it come up. Greg, you have something?
Well, Well, and I was just thinking that in some ways, the unexpected doesn't always show itself as a crisis, right? I mean, I keep hoping that we come up against these situations that we hadn't predicted in terms of the use or various conditions around the blockchain and our community that we didn't expect, we didn't anticipate, and just, it's not a crisis, but quite the opposite. It's like an unexpected boon, an unexpected opportunity and benefit.
An unexpected opportunity to be required to make a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad said that every problem is an opportunity, and in business he proved it again and again and again. Whenever the shit hit the fan, he came out smelling like a rose. But I think why I'm here is because I'm hoping to see cooperation at scale happen, and it's clear that if it happens, we can accomplish great things. So what would make me leave if I don't see that cooperation at scale happening here?
Here, here. Hey, Jim. Yeah. So who wants to tell us about cooperation at scale? I have actually kind of an analogy that I came up with just yesterday on how to explain the difference between Casper and traditional consensus protocol. And it's kind of a cooperation analogy. So normally the way I describe a consensus protocol is, okay, you have a bunch of people and they're at the top of a mountain and they're trying to climb down together so that they end up at the same place at the bottom of the mountain. With the traditional consensus protocol, everyone will kind of like coordinate on the edge where they want to go, and then they'll kind of like jump down with like a rope, and they'll all need to coordinate exactly about where they're going to jump before they jump, and they make this leap. And so they coordinate before they leap. Whereas like in Casper, what we kind of do instead is we're kind of climbing down the wall. We don't really care which direction you go, but you just make sure that you're close enough that you're not going to be separated from anyone else. You know, you watch and make sure you're not separated. You don't, and you kind of will go in any direction. You don't really care where you end up. But so instead of having any point where you commit, you just stick together, and you maintain consensus safety kind of in that manner. So kind of the idea is like, oh, part of coordination in Casper is everyone, all the nodes are kind of watching each other's opinions and kind of reconciling their own view in order to try to believe in the same fork choice rules that other people believe. Whereas in traditional consensus protocols, everyone kind of decides and then or coordinates and then jumps off, and it's kind of as opposed to compromising. It's more of like a decision process. Anyways, just like some kind of examples of coordination that we see at the very base level of the protocol, right? But I'm not sure if that's mass coordination. We're probably talking about people coordinating rather than computers. Yeah, hi. We get a microphone.
Yeah, I want to raise something there. If we speak about mass collaboration, yes, or collaboration at scale, it is implicit that there are positive sides of usage and negative sides. And I want to raise some negatives there, just to be aware of this, because we enable this. It's a huge power. We can build, for example, decentralized assassination markets. So just to raise that there. And we need to decide if we want to support something like that or not. And I think it is, with creating such powerful technologies, it's also down to the communities to have a standpoint of destructive technologies which arose on top of those platforms. So I think we should have a position there, because the power we create with such platforms will have a profound impact for many people in the world. And therefore, we don't have the freedom to not have a decision on something like that. Just my point there. So to make something, to make a standpoint as a community, we need to have an association with values, which give us the opportunity to decide if we want to support that or not. And from my perspective, I mean, I wish we have a sustainable world where we have a collaborative win-win, omni-win, where we support each other, right, and not destroy each other, and where we have a democratic world, whatsoever, but not whatsoever, but I think we need to think about that. And a project I would like to emphasize there is to maybe work on something like a community constitution in that direction, which gives us the opportunity to, well, have a standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an awesome input. You know, I think there's lots of cases that you can imagine where smart contracts could be used for people to coordinate for malicious ends as opposed to good ends, and it's definitely a conversation that we should have as soon as possible so that we understand the various ideas that are at play, at least, so that when an event happens, we're kind of more prepared to deal with it.
This also goes to so Jim, you were saying collaboration, cooperation at scale. Part of cooperation is validating people's ideas in the context of a window and a door, right? Yeah, you want to. I totally get that you want to collaborate on an assassination, but there's a door here, and we don't allow that, and it's not a value judgment, or it's not anything else other than like this is our limit, and so it can be. You can still kind of validate someone without actually agreeing with them or any other, and enabling them to do that. So did I lose someone on that?
But how do you not allow them to do that?
Yeah, we would have to come up with the value that Kenny suggested. We have the value, and it is not allowed to be used for these purposes.
Yeah, but how do you enforce when it's not allowed? You mean hard forks?
There needs to be some consensus around the enforcement.
Okay, I agree. That would be great. But so there's the kind of classic kind of concern is, oh look, if you accept that there's going to be enforcement and like interference with smart contracts, especially in extreme cases, then you need to think about the governance processes and think about what it would like, and like, are those processes secure? Does this create a vulnerability for the whole platform, right? And these are exactly the kind of really tough questions that we're going to be grappling with, and like over the course of next few days over dinner and breakfast and lunch.
And then to your global warming point, which is also kind of, I've been personally grappling with it. If you don't believe in global warming, why should you get to vote on global warming policies? Right? Like, it's kind of like giving the drunk person in your car the wheel. So, I mean, that has to go with, like, how do you stake that?
We touched on this stuff a little bit in our discussion for.
So to the point of what's allowed and what's not allowed, when you start censoring things, that removes the whole point of having a censorship-resistant platform. Even though it's bad and people may not like it, you're like, well, this won't be allowed. And then the next, well, maybe this won't be allowed. And that guy said shit, so now that's not allowed. Where does it stop? It's all or nothing. You can't just say, well, that's bad. It's not ideal, but it's a open source, decentralized platform, and you can't stop it. It's unstoppable, which is the whole point of having a decentralized platform.
So the issue is, are we valuing freedom of speech over freedom of life?
Yes. Freedom of speech. There's no one. There's no one or the other. You have freedom of speech. You say as you please, as long as you're not hurting people. Well, I mean, then again. But you can't stop what's created. It's a decentralized platform. What's built is built. Is it bad?
Like,
sure.
Like software that's like attached to some secure hardware that's attached to like some automated like killing machine is, not speech. It's not political speech anyways. It's more like kill instructions. censorship-resistant kill instructions, decentralized kill instructions. Yeah, it's terrifying, and I think that there's but definitely value the input, and absolutely, Nash was clapping along. You got strong allies over here. We're gonna have a real debate. Let's hear it, Jim. Oh, never mind. Not Jim.
Just to add to what Brandon said, I mean, it's fine even if nefarious behavior is allowed on it, it's actually fine because now law enforcement, etc., deciding on whatever policy governments or we as a society decide to institute, have more access. Like if people wanted to gang up and assassinate somebody using fiat currency, it's actually a lot easier. When they do it now, the cops could just be like, wow, looks like there's some mischief here. Maybe we do something to stop it. So I actually don't view it as a problem, similar to what Brad said.
I think that when we decentralize, we're decentralizing everything. And we have to, if there's no oversight on the system, which there will not be, then we are all part of the militia, and we are all responsible to oversee our neighbors and our communities and keep them safe.
Yeah, but so but the question is okay, even law enforcement or not, they're gonna the only way to interfere sometimes is by changing what software is running on the network.
Right. So I think maybe this goes back to the difference of the co-op and the platform, the purpose of each. So maybe the purpose of the platform is this agnostic global utility. And there could be functions in the co-op that incentivize catching a bad actor. Hey, there's giant bounties to catch these people. Just as an example, and that's a way to kind of best of both worlds.
I think there's no question, right, that the technology is going to have an awesome power, and that RChain should come with the pseudo warning. That with great power comes great responsibility. But I don't think that that's any different from any other blockchain, right? The question is, how is RChain different? And I think, what we talked about was that RChain is different because it's owned by a collective, right? So yeah, we have this awesome technology, this potentially really scary tool, which could be used for all kinds of, all kinds of unimaginable purposes, but it's in our hands. And so we have to come to consensus about it's not necessarily about the technology, it's about the fact that it's in the community's hands, right? It's owned by the community.
And you think the technology should serve the community?
Yeah, of course. Well, we get to make that choice. Mm-hmm. That's what RChain is. It's the people's blockchain. It's the true open source. We don't become the Tyrrell Corporation because we own the chain.
Yeah, it's like if you care about child trafficking so much, what have you done to stop it?
Advocated for a hard fork. It might be the answer one day.
Notice that all of this code is open source. Anyone can fork it and use it themselves to do any of these nefarious things.
Yeah, that's for sure. But the question is, as the RChain community, are we going to do anything about people doing nefarious things on the RChain blockchain, or do we just say, okay, look, we can't stop them doing it on a fork. They might as well do it over here.
So if you're completely censorship resistant, where you'll let people put anything they want on the blockchain, that also provides a mechanism of attack of RChain itself. So for example, if there are legal restrictions around content publication and distribution, say, I brought this up a few times, child pornography. If somebody uploads onto your core blockchain child pornography, then anybody hosting a node could be potentially held liable for distribution of child pornography and be sent to prison. And so this is the sort of thing where, what do you do in that kind of case? And it's not clear, because it's not just a question of what can be put there and are you censorship resistant, but
does it provide a threat to the ongoing hosting of the blockchain over time? So just one of many examples.
Great, yeah, thanks.
So I think this is a really important topic, but it's also a question of responsibility. So, I mean, if something is illegal to do with fiat, it's obviously still illegal to do using any other technology or method or whatever. For example, criminals use telephones, email, cars. They use all the technology of modern society, and nobody expects the telephone companies to actively, block people who are using the cell phone service for criminal purposes. I mean, that's the police's job. They do. That's the point. There are certain steps that you can take short of making it impossible, such as collecting information, which you need to be able to do, but it's not necessarily the responsibility of the cooperative to stop all criminal activity. We have to take a reasoned position to say, like, here's the information that is available and make that available to law enforcement upon their request, but we don't have to preemptively stop everything that anyone might possibly do.
Nor could we, really.
That's impossible.
But it opens up a new opportunities also, right? So one of the
microphone.
Yeah. So, if you have a crisis or you have a problems, these kind of problems, it opens up a new business avenues also. So there will be people, they will be making some solution to solve these kind of problems. So it's same thing, if it's a centralized word in telephone, as Evan said, there are people they created security companies, they do things to catch these kind of people. So I'm sure there'll be people, they will think about all these things, they will create solution to prevent these things on the blockchain.
Yeah. So is your hypothesis that any enforcement that is required will can be outside of the blockchain? So there will never be any enforcement required through actual actions in blockchain governance.
So the biggest question for you in that case, why do we need a blockchain, right? So the way why we need cooperative to do this. So we need to bring those solutions from among us. Somebody needs to bring those. If there are problems, we need to solve those problems. If we just talk about only problem all the time, probably we may not have to create these things, right? Either you censor from the beginning, as Brandon said, that if you're opening up for everybody, I think it's a good idea to, keep it open for everyone, but definitely there will be actors, they will bring new solutions to solve these kind of problems. And it opens up, better opportunities for RChain in terms of how people use this one or how RChain scales in general.
John.
So I think one issue I see is I think a lot of these models kind of assume that RChain is always going to have like a peaceful coexistence with law enforcement, and that, for instance, crypto continues to go without a problem with old money or corporate world or anything without any kind of threat. If for whatever reason governments want to shut down cryptocurrencies, at least to me, it's really important that we start to think of some kind of built-in resistances to something like that, rather than rely on, say, hey, we're going to be allowing child porn because the governments will clean it up. If the governments then turn on RChain, then it's like a very easy sale, easy attack vector to really shut it all down. And I think it's naive to think that it'll always be this way where we can rely on government to impose our morals or judgments about how things should be.
I totally agree and want to add on that as well. I mean, if you think about, for example, that RChain is a global network, right? Then we need also assume that we have different jurisdictional zones where different interest actors will interfere with the content of the network. So as far as I understand the approach of the technology side, we will see different RChain charts, right, with different policies. So, and I think that is the way to go as well, because this enables to distribute also the say law enforcement side to different areas, and different actors will take care about different policy enforcements, and this will give us more resilience as well, and different charts with different properties. And I think it is in our interest to have charts also which are government resilient, right, for some purposes. But yeah, I think it's good to think in a multi-dimensional space there, like that this will be not one solution, but one governance algorithm. Yeah.
So just a heads up, we're at 4:47. I think we've got at 5 o'clock somebody coming in. Is that right? So just to be aware.
Yeah, so I think that, like, definitely if we're going to have some kind of, like, constitution or something like that, you know, we're going to need to address some of these issues. But I definitely think that, you know, it would be contrary to the whole ethos of blockchain for us to say that we're happy to have blockchain governance be entirely inside U.S. jurisdiction. I think, you know, it's kind of important that it's not the case that if the co-op gets a court order, then they will get a hard fork where everyone will just, like, change the software. On the other hand, I don't think we agree yet whether or not we should have, like, the full immutability and recourse and governance only outside the blockchain, or whether or not blockchain governance will also be used for the things like, you know, fund recovery, the DAO fork, shutting down the assassination markets, shutting down the autonomous drone army, and all the and whatever else autonomous software powered shenanigans we might you know have to be dealt with in the future. So basically, do you want to try to get the mic back there? Yeah. So somehow this is like a pretty important debate for the I think that we should have as part of this process for, you know, especially if we decide that we want to have governance, active governance, then checks and balances for the co-op and for the, like, between the software developers and the node operators is going to be super important, because you can't really have anyone have control over the state to be able to interfere with smart contracts on an arbitrary basis, because that would undermine and go contrary to the whole system, right? So if we are going to do active governance, then we have somehow an even bigger governance problem ahead of us. Sure, yeah.
What's happening at 5? Oh, okay, great, fine, okay, I understood. I just also want to recommend, I know that after a long day, probably it's easy to let the energy drop a little bit. You know, it's kind of natural for the energy to drop, and you know, and I think for a lot of us, we work with our heads a lot, and so it's kind of easy to go back up into our heads and forget about the rest of our being. And so I was wondering if we could make some time either before or after Colin to allow the MatrixWorks people to help us kind of reintegrate, you know, with the body and the heart as well. Because I think a lot of these conversations are important, but, you know, just the quality of the conversation feels very head-centric, and and I'm kind of wondering if we could bring some other stuff, other technologies that are already present in these instruments online, so to speak. So would people be open to that now? Now? Okay.
I don't know if this is the right time just before our break, but we could notice that the last half hour has been blockchains versus government, kind of, you know, one group morality versus another group morality, and that just doesn't feel right. I mean, maybe the solution is, you know, as a society, as a world, we need to decide what the role of blockchain is, not as RChain.
Everybody stand up, please. Shake your body a little bit. Make some noise. Okay. All right. Would you get a partner, please? Get a partner and stand. Would you model with me, Greg? Are you and Gabi model?
Yeah, we're partners.
Okay, Gabi and Greg are partners. Stand side by side. Okay, everybody get a partner, stand side by side, and push your partner. Push, 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 a little bit more. Whoa, push, 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 push. Okay, and change sides. All right, this time, okay, shh, this time when you push, one of you says yes and the other says no. Okay? You say yes. No. Yes. No. 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 You're strong. Okay. Okay. All right. Face each other. Decide if you're the right closeness or distance from each other. Ah! So try moving toward each other. Oh! And then try backing up. Back up. And what is too far away? Huh? There's a place that feels right in terms of our personal space and the space of the other. Okay, all right. We're going to do one last little thing with the partner. Shh. Please make eye contact with your partner. Think about the day. And I invite you to remember something that happened today that seemed to make you feel hopeful and encouraged your confidence and increased your sense of appreciation and perhaps even gratitude. Might have even been the good food. Whatever it was. And just take a moment and share with your partner what it was that really made you feel more safe, more present, and more available. Okay. Shh. We're going to very quickly and efficiently make a large circle. Come closer. We have to see everybody. No. Right on the inside, everybody find a place. Okay, it can, I don't think so, Greg. I think it'll work. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to just go around and hear one word from each person here. And it just reflects how you're feeling as we end this day. Okay, and will you start us, Heidi?
Excited.
Joyful.
Tired.
Inspired.
Grateful.
Inspired too.
Curious.
Heartfelt.
Nourished.
Inspired also.
Thankful.
Confused.
Adventurous.
Happy.
Peaked.
Hopeful.
Motivated.
Welcome.
Excited.
Eternal.
Thankful.
Connected.
Contemplative.
Hopeful.
Happy.
Decentralized. Relieved.
Exhilarated.
You took it. Relieved.
Connected.
Connected.
Brittle.
Here.
Creative.
Unfinished.
Mauling.
Curious.
Excited.
Connected.
Excited as well.
Assured.
Hopeful.
Synchronized.
Happy.
Impressed. Privileged.
Empowered.
Enlightened.
Energized.
Apart.
Anti-fragile.
Odd. Impressed.
And my word is ancient and brand new. I get to use more than one. Okay, thank you so much. So we have a 5 o'clock, somebody calling in? Okay. So I guess go back to your seats.
You know how to walk back there. Do you need to get your backpack out of my car? Yeah.
Is he leaving?
Yeah, he's going to.
Yeah. Yes.
John, that's for you.
Okay, and
he's
I'm sorry?
He's just right there. He and his.
Oh, okay. So he's ready to go? Veronica, he's ready to go? Hello. So we have a guest speaker beaming in from some remote location. His name is Colin Clark. He's the lead software architect at the OCAD, hang on, I've got notes here. Where's my notes? At the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD in Ottawa, Canada. He's very much involved with the platform co-op programs around the world. And he was brought to our attention by Ian Bloom's attendance at the Platform Co-op Conference in New York City, what was it, a year ago, 2 years ago? Oh, last fall. So I will let Colin give his presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you. So I brought with me my colleague Dana Ayotte as well, and we're actually not in Ottawa. We are in Canada. I'm sitting in my office here at OCAD University in Toronto, where fortunately most of the snow has melted, but there was like 3 feet of it the other day. And Dana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, hope everybody can hear me. I'm a senior designer at the IDRC. However, I am located on the west coast of Canada in British Columbia, from where I work remotely. And yeah, I've been with the IDRC about 6 years or so, and pretty excited about platform co-ops, and happy to be here today. So thanks.
So we have some slides. I'll share my screen in a minute, but basically the structure of our talk will be to outline some of the values and goals of creating platforms and the challenges, and then to talk about platform cooperativism in particular, and how they're governed and catalyzed and created. And then we hopefully will have time for questions at the end. So let me share my screen. I think it will mean that I won't be able to see you when it goes full screen, but we will get that all set up. Just let me know when you can see it. Okay, can you see my screen? Looks like Dana's nodding, so I'm gonna full screen, 1 second. Okay, can you still see my screen? Everything working? Great. So I wanted to start with the question of why create platforms and why think about economic inclusion, which is at the heart of our work supporting platform cooperatives. And we have some really tough realities that we're facing these days in many of our countries and in society at large. Many of these are stats you probably know about, but I've pulled them from the recent UN Human Rights Commission report on inequality in the United States. But I think many of these issues are part of a huge part of our developing economies. In America, 85% of the post-2008 economic growth was pocketed by the richest 1%. The US ranks 35th out of the 37 OECD countries, so second to last in terms of its levels of poverty and inequality. This means that more than 1 in every 8 Americans are currently living in poverty. And to go with this, only about 64% of US voting age people were registered to vote in 2016. This is a smaller share of potential voters than just about any other OECD country, and certainly one of the lowest voter turnouts as well. We can only dream if that number was different, how the US election might have changed. And what's interesting about the report from the UN Commission that came out just before the holidays is that it highlighted the roles that technology plays in this growing income and economic inequality. So the author of this study, a law professor at NYU, said that the United States is one of the most richest and most powerful and technologically innovative countries, but neither its wealth nor its technology is being harnessed to address the situation in which 40 million Americans continue to live in poverty. And also, he called for more attention needing to be given to the ways in which new technology impact the human rights of the poorest Americans. And so with that kind of framing, that challenge in mind, I want to talk a little bit about what we think technology is or could be. And I want to highlight a quote from Ursula Franklin, who is an engineer and a scholar who used to be at the University of Toronto. She passed away recently, but Ursula was one of the clearest thinkers about the idea of technology as a practice. She described technology as the way we do things around here. And this is to say, perhaps pointing out the obvious, that the way we create our technologies, the technologies, how we code them, how we design them, and the values and the social dynamic that we practice with as we're creating our technologies and our platforms, and the values that we invest within the systems that we're developing. All of those things have a fundamental shaping effect on the kinds of technologies that we're even able to create, and on what kinds of things people will be able to do with these platforms and technologies, and what they'll be able to express. So what's interesting about Ursula Franklin's framework for technology is it reminds us that if we don't change our design and our technological practices, the same systems of inequality that we see out in the world today in our economies and our societies will actually be reflected in our own platforms. And that's despite our best intentions. Here I think good intentions aren't enough. We actually need to change the way we design and develop. So Dana and I both work at a place called the Inclusive Design Research Center. And the goal here is to create new design and development practices, tools that other people can use and contribute to. Everything we do is open source and open access. And to teach the principles and the techniques of what we call inclusive design, which I'll talk about in a second. We do a lot of work on international standards around accessibility and access. And we also provide services that support people with disabilities in having their technology match up with them and their personal needs. So one of the main changes, the shift in technology design and development that I was talking about earlier that we work with is something called co-design. And co-design is the practice of designing with people, not just for them. We don't have a kind of instrumental or a prescriptive process. Many design methodologies will tell you that you have to do these kinds of research steps and that kind of persona and modeling and stuff. We don't go with the kind of instrumental process so much as to bring the people that we design technologies with into our space to be dynamic and flexible and opportunistic in how we draw the roles and relationships in the design practice, and to be willing to step aside as not just being the inspired designer or technologist, but to step back and say, hey, what role would you like me to play in this process, and what role would you like to play as we create these platforms and these systems? Here's a photograph of a co-design workshop we did a year or two ago here in Toronto, where we invited kids with disabilities and their parents to come in and to bring off-the-shelf toys that they could get at Toys R Us and other places, mostly electronic toys. And then we worked with them to hack the toys with technologies like Arduinos and other things to make them accessible, especially for children with mobility impairments who might not otherwise be able to play with toys and engage with their friends by connecting them up to their single switches, their wheelchairs, etc. We were able to co-design new toys and to hack new possibilities into them. Of course, not all our work is related to physical computing. We do user interface design as well. But the co-design work we do is in context of an open source community that we call Fluid. And Fluid is a community for the designers, users, artists, accessibility people, thinkers, and all the other people who don't usually fit into the traditional open source software communities. How many of you in the room there have participated in open source of one kind or another, created pull requests on GitHub or patches or other things? Looks like many of you. I know that the RChain technology is really based on open source. One of the things we realized as we started to do open source when we founded Fluid now 10 years ago was that meritocracy didn't quite work like we thought it did. Meritocracy is always based on the privileges that some people have access to. It's always based on weighting certain kinds of contributions, especially code over designs or testing or other parts that really are the crucial contributions to making large-scale, usable production. So when we do co-design, one of the things that we think about is Sherry Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation. Are people familiar with Arnstein's ladder? Some people perhaps. So Arnstein talks about citizen participation as being a redistribution of power that enables the have-nots citizens to be able, the people who are excluded from political and economic processes, to be deliberately included in the future. It's the strategy by which have-nots are able to be part of determining how information is shared, goals and policies are set, programs are operated, and how benefits like contracts or patronage, which becomes really important in cooperatives, are parceled out and dealt with. So Arnstein's ladder looks something like this. I hope you can see this slide, but at the bottom, she's got methods that involve non-participation, moving up to a kind of tokenism, which would be consultations or information or placating. And really it's the top of Arnstein's ladder, citizen power, which she basically describes as starting with forming partnerships, delegating power to those, for example, who form the cooperatives, and ultimately to a kind of citizen control, which means, again, in the context of platform cooperatives, that it's those who produce the material on the platform, those who depend on it, who are the ones who control and are responsible for the platform. I'm just going to pause for a sec because I've seen a couple of things pop up in the chat, so I want to make sure I'm not missing anything there. And then we'll move on. Oh, I can't even see the chat. I'm going to assume that Dana, you will tell me if I'm
Yeah, I think it's okay. I lost your audio briefly. I'm not sure why, but it was very brief and then it came back. So.
Oh no. But everyone can hear me now? We're good? I think we must be. All right. So when we're thinking about platforms as well, trust comes up in our minds, and how we can create platforms that provide a more nuanced and sophisticated notion of what trust is. And I've been struggling through reading a lot of books recently about trust and thinking, well, what's going on here? And this is my somewhat tentative ideas about what trust is. That trust at heart, I think, is a continuous negotiation. It's something that's always happening. It's a conversation between people. It's not something that exists or doesn't exist, but it is in flux, or it's like tides. They come in and out at different times. It's about negotiation. It's also contingent on roles, on relationships, perhaps even on power structures as well. And the trust relationships really are surplus, I think, to what we can express in code, regardless of the power of our platforms, the expressiveness of our programming language, our ability to prove code and systems correct. The relationships and the systems of trust that occur on our platform are largely surplus to them. They happen in spite of us in many cases. And so I think that in principle, as a kind of value, platforms need to build systems of trusts that are able to make power imbalances where they exist explicit, and to build in ways to address or remediate those imbalances. And I think what this means when we're thinking about technical platforms is that each participant in a platform, regardless of their technical knowledge or skill, should have different ways to see into the platform, to understand how it's working, what the roles and responsibilities are within the platform, and to feel vested in the ability to influence the inner workings of the system. It seems to me that this is the heart of a functioning democracy, that when people feel engaged and able to influence how the system works and its direction, then their levels of participation and investment and of course the opportunities that come with that increase. I think this is my last slide in terms of general values, but what I wanted to do here was articulate a set of platform user rights, and basically to argue that transparency and creative power are part of a right that people who participate in platforms and are members of cooperatives have. And I think that things like open source and open access resources really go a long way to help with transparency and creative power. But I'm also talking about the technical capacity of the system. Again, for people to be able to see into and understand the inner workings of the parts of the platform or the system, and to even see if somebody's programmed a contract or some logic or a user interface in the platform, to see and understand how those things were composed together, to be able to create new software components or remix those parts of the platform without having to be part of a technical elite. And you know, I haven't met, unfortunately I wasn't able to join you in Seattle. I haven't met most of you, but I'd guess that many of you are quite technical, have a background in programming or mathematics. And so I do as well. And those of us who write code have a kind of technical power that's unique. And so platforms increasingly need to be able to delegate that power through authoring tools, meta-programming systems, et cetera, in order to give people this ability to see into things, create things without being programmers, to take software applications apart and maybe choose to only use one piece of it, or to combine two different things on a platform together to create a new one, to be able to see the state of a software application or what's running on the platform, and then to be able to present it differently inside another software application. And this is really crucial for people with disabilities who may need one mode of presentation or one way of perceiving, hearing instead of seeing, etc., to be able to access and see in our platforms. And to be able to freely customize the user interface so that it uses a representation that works best for me. So again, as a kind of abstract value, these are the rights that we want to build into the platforms that we're creating as part of our work on platform cooperativism. It seems abstract, and I wanted to use a visual metaphor. This is some artwork by an artist in the UK named Amy Twigger Holroyd. And Amy does something very interesting. She, in this case, she bought a machine manufactured sort of generic off-the-shelf sweater. And Amy's work involves these very careful operations that get into the machine manufactured sweater and then are able to transform it and to produce something new out of the raw materials of a sweater. And so think about this from the technical perspective. When we're building platforms, can we allow people who aren't us and may not have access to the same level of industrial machinery that, the loom that knit this sweater originally, but can we give them ways to splice their own designs into the process, to express their own new embellishments or forms of creativity within the structure that's already been provided or presented to them? So I think if you're cool with it, Dana, I will pass it on to you and we can dive a little deeper into what, okay, so there's all these values. Now, what's this platform cooperativism stuff?
Great, thanks, Colin. I love that sweater. I wish I was wearing that sweater. Yeah, so we pulled this quote out from an essay by Juliette Bichor in Old Exclusion in Emergent Spaces, and it pulled it out because it really speaks to, I think, the connection between inclusive design and platform cooperativism. I'm just going to read you the quote. If platform co-ops are to succeed without reproducing their own more privileged class, race, and gender homogeneousness, founders and early participants must be highly attuned to subtle social dynamics that valorize the practices and traits of dominant groups. Furthermore, they must stop those dynamics from developing. Practically speaking, achieving that probably means starting with a diverse group of founders and early participants, at the very least on the social dimensions of class, race, and gender. And of course, we would add disability there as well in terms of unique needs and a broad range of needs in terms of interacting with digital content and digital technology. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so wanted to speak to, as Colin mentioned, now I'm going to talk a bit about what we think why we think, why platform co-ops, why they're important, what they can address. So in terms of the digital economy, we believe we need alternative economic models because currently the economy powering the internet is not working. Some of the things that Colin pointed out about financial inequality are a problem. There's a lack of workplace democracy in many cases. There's a lot of top-down control of platforms. Invasion of privacy that we're all very familiar with in terms of our digital information. There's a kind of smokescreen of counterculture, what's often referred to as the sharing economy that's not really about sharing. And again, it's that top-down control and who's benefiting and who's making the money. There's a shift to more freelance work in the digital world, so we need better protection of worker rights in that regard. And stagnating wages are also a problem. So we believe that platform co-ops respond to the market failures of the online economy. And we're just going to list some of the benefits of the platform co-op model in that regard. Platform co-ops have a lower transaction and retention costs. Surplus revenues are transferred directly to members of the co-op. We also know that 80% of co-ops survive their first 5 years, compared with 41% of other business ownership models. In co-ops, money flows within local communities. And there's a protection from exploitation through ownership, transparency, and worker control. And there's a higher commitment as well of users, which reduces short-termism. So it creates a longer life, more staying power for these co-op businesses. And there's the prospect of data democracy as well.
And Dana, I don't know if you get into this, but it occurs to me that we haven't defined platform cooperativism in a simple way. We've talked about values, we've talked about benefits, but would it be right to say that platform cooperatives are co-ops that are supported by new technologies for things like finding customers, doing transactions for services or goods exchanged, that it's things along the line of, let's say, Uber or Airbnb, where the platform becomes as crucial as the service offered, but unlike the extractive model of those, where there's a company over there that gets the bulk of the profits, that it's owned cooperatively by all of the workers and providers on the platform. Is that roughly it?
Yes, thanks, Colin. That's helpful. Cool. Great. Yeah, so again, we know we can build on a business model that's proven to work. We know that 1 in 3 Americans is a co-op member. In the US, co-ops created close to 1 million jobs with $25 billion in wages and benefits. The total co-op revenue in the US right now is $500 billion. And cooperative enterprises worldwide employ 250 million people and generate 2.2 trillion in revenue. So co-ops exist, and they're kind of hidden in plain sight. So I want you to imagine now a digital economy that would follow these 7 cooperative principles. So the first is voluntary and open membership. The second is democratic member control. And third is member economic participation. Fourth is autonomy and independence. Fifth is education, training, and information. Sixth is cooperation among cooperatives. And finally, concern for community. Yeah, so I wanted to get a little more into specifically what we're doing at the IDRC with currently. We're developing a platform, what we're calling the Platform Co-op Commons. So this image is just kind of showing that process of the sequential, probably not entirely linear, we've got a lot of back and forth, but if we look at it in this way, you start by proposing, finding, and meeting others who might be interested in creating a co-op with you, potential collaborators, and can make all these, we would create the ability to connect and find those who are interested or those who are already creating platform co-ops and learn from them and propose your own co-op. And then there would be a stage of organizing and recruiting others to be involved with your co-op. And then the more formally kind of getting started with the business model, incubating the co-op. And through all of this, resources would be made available and created within the commons so that they're highly accessible and available to anyone who might want to use them. And then finally, the sharing and collaboration between cooperatives, as we mentioned, is one of the values, that cooperation between cooperatives as well, and sharing resources in that way, just to get a kind of sense of what that looks like. Yeah.
And the idea of the platform co-op commons is to basically to increase capacity for people to form their own cooperatives, to share the code and systems that are needed to deliver that in a digital economy, and then to find the resources, governance, what kind of a cooperative should I form? What governance models should I look at? Where are there economies of scale? Where if cooperatives hooked up with other cooperatives, etc. So the commons is the kind of open source model in which we build tools and resources to better support and create more of these kinds of platform cooperatives.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Yeah, and we just listed here different ways that a platform co-op might come into being. So an existing worker co-op could just launch a platform co-op and become digital, have a digital presence. Failing startups might be able to convert into platform co-ops and find success in that way. Platform co-ops can be created as a result of antitrust regulations. Colin spoke a lot to the point about trust. And co-ops can launch platform co-ops with the help of their unions. So existing co-ops can do that with their union support.
And I think we're seeing, Trevor Schultz is the expert in these things, but he's seeing all four of these as the common vectors in which platform co-ops are founded. We're quite interested particularly in the top one, where existing cooperatives, or in fact individuals, so caregivers, home cleaners perhaps, you can think of all kinds of cases. If you're an individual and you're sort of thinking, hey, how could I grow in a way that's cooperative and complementary to some others who may be struggling with the same challenges. But we're seeing in lots of cases that, again, failing startups are turning into, or companies that have been owned by a single owner for a long time and then are converting into a cooperative model as a result.
So I just saw a message that we have to wrap up due to time constraints.
Oh, okay.
Am I right about that? Please finish within 5 minutes. Okay.
We can skip a couple slides.
Yeah. Maybe, well, I'll talk to this slide. I think this one's important. So just to talk a bit about our project, it's basically kind of breaking it down into the learning commons that we talked a little bit about, and the toolkit. So it's really a lot about creating these resources to allow people to more easily start platform co-ops, to know why they might want to start one, how they started, who else might be interested. Providing legal templates is really important. Onboarding tools to get people started. So basically that's what we're up to, the idea. And yeah.
We've been working with Harvard Law School on these legal templates, so giving cooperatives a way to more easily, and co-op law is actually quite obscure in terms of the lawyers you can find. I think there are about 30 practicing lawyers in the US who specialize in cooperative law. So can we give digital tools to support them in the process of founding a cooperative, thinking through the governance challenges, et cetera?
Yes, and Colin mentioned Trevor Schultz at the New School that we're working with closely on this project. So, yeah.
We got a little bit of funding. It's not a lot, but the Google Foundation gave us some support to build what we're kind of calling the first version, maybe not quite a 1.0, but we'll call it the Platform Co-op Toolkit 1.0. And that's to build out the learning commons. So basically part of increasing people's capacity to form their own independent cooperatives is to have the learning tools that they need to think through the questions of what kind of cooperative, what models of governance, et cetera, and to build that in a Creative Commons licensed, open, easily translatable set of resources. And then to co-design the tools, we're doing this with caregivers, particularly in the Filipino caregiving community, that would allow individual caregivers to find others, to say, hey, here are my goals or the problems I'm facing with my own personal caregiving business. These are the kinds of ways I'd like to grow. These are the ways I'd like to measure the success of my work and others, and then to kind of match them up with others who would be complementary with that, and then help them kind of work through, again, the legality and give them the technical infrastructure for finding and forming cooperatives. And maybe, what do you think, Dana? Should we do any more? Or?
I think, what's after this one? Remind me. Yeah, so I think we can, yeah. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions we can talk about before we wrap up?
Sorry, did anybody have questions? I'll pass the mic. No.
How much of your resources can we crib?
That's a great question. Again, it's all open source and Creative Commons license. So as we build those resources, please take them, use them, and share new ones with us as well.
Cool, thanks.
I'm actually wondering if there might be an iteration where you consider RChain as a resource that you incorporate in your offering.
It was something we chatted about. Was that maybe a month ago? And that possibility. I think. It's fascinating. I hear from blockchain venture capital funds quite regularly. They're always in touch with Trevor, a number of other platform developers. I think RChain has some really interesting aspects that make it quite unique. I have a lot of interest in the ways in which people can get started today in making their cooperatives. Who, workers, in many cases, again, home cleaners, caregivers, are in relatively precarious financial situations. So to what extent can the values and the goals that you share and that I talked about earlier be something that's realized through a platform like RChain? That's a conversation I'd love to have. And it's funny because maybe you all of you can tell us how something like RChain would, how complementary is it to this vision of an open democratic platform and to collaboration and participation, and what are the areas we should be looking at in RChain and looking for collaborations with?
So Resonate was listed as one of the co-op platform co-ops on that list, I think, and I think we have a gentleman from Resonate over here, and they do work with RChain. So I would be curious to understand how it's working or is planned to work for Resonate. Would you be able to comment on that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
To me, the whole purpose of building Resonate was to create a full music ecosystem that could support the culture from every conceivable direction. And RChain is the first platform that I ever came across that I think mirrors the way that communities form at its core. As far as I understand it, I'm not a mathematician, and I can only look at these gorgeous fractal graphics and know that there's some math connected to that makes it happen. And I trust this guy implicitly with every cell in his body. So and I know a lot of his peer group think he's brilliant. So I have faith that it's going to be carried out as described. And so having that technology to reflect the organizations that communities need across all types of musical cultures and subcultures is truly profound, and I feel immensely grateful to be able to collaborate and work together.
Amazing. That sounds really interesting.
And
Other
I would say,
thoughts
I would sorry, just add one other thought too, which is that one of the other things that's really super exciting about it is that they're a co-op and we're a co-op, and so sixth principle, collaborate with co-ops. And then I found there was another co-op here today that's doing something in shopping, and I want to collaborate with them, you know, because we want to do business. And then there's going to be other co-ops that come in, and then, you know, we've got some chance for a really robust circular economy.
Yeah, amazing. These networks of cooperatives that can, you know, grow out in a way that is complementary and still brings money in for the people who need it. That's great.
All right, well, if there aren't any other questions.
So we're the last speakers of the day. You guys must be ready for food.
You sure our cocktails are next, sorry.
Yes.
No, it's great. Thank you so much for joining, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. This was great, and I hope we can keep up the conversation.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.
Excellent. Cocktails are down in the